or a business owner, I have countless examples of people really stepping up and coming together as a community.
I completely agree. Jonathan, what we've seen is really unprecedented. I think people in our community stepping up. I did want to shout out to Helping Hands, which has been an organization in New Westminster who's done phenomenal work, but right across the city, we're seeing people step up in a variety of ways, taking care of their neighbors as well. And this is part of, I think, the New Westminster tradition. We have people reaching out. I can see people coming on today. In fact, a neighbor, Dee Beattie, of course, from school board, has just said to hello to both of us, and we've got other people coming on as well. Ben is on, and a number of other people tuning in, which is fantastic. I'm Peter Julie. I'm here with Mayor Jonathan Cote. We're talking about New Westminster during the COVID-19 pandemic, and what is so important for us to remember is that we're all in this together, and as a city, we stand together. I wanted to talk to you, Jonathan, about some of the challenges that New Westminster is facing as a city. I certainly am aware of this, and for the city of New Westminster, and of course for cities right across the country, the Finance Committee did have hearings, and they invited you as one of two city mayors, yourself and Mike Hurley from the city of Burnaby. You both came a week and a half ago. You testified on the virtual Finance Committee, which was broadcast right across the country, and spoke to some of those challenges that cities are facing. And as well, you spoke to some of the challenges that the transit system is facing. So I'd be interested in knowing, and I think our viewers, the people who are tuning in, would be very interested in knowing too. What are the challenges that the city of New Westminster is facing? What is the challenge that you see with our transit system regionally? What are the kinds of things that we have to look for to resolve in the coming weeks and months?
Yeah, so I think it's a really big question. There's no doubt, COVID-19 has really affected communities and cities all across the country. Some affected a little differently, others, but all of us affected. I think the first impact is how do we as local governments who have the closest connection to residents be able to help support our residents that are finding particular challenges. So here in the city of New Westminster, we actually established a number of working groups to really target some areas that we were concerned most about. First and foremost, there was vulnerable and at-risk populations, and here we've been able to do work with partnering with nonprofits and different agencies to better support the homeless population in the community. One issue that's really come up is an issue of food security, because on one hand, there's been a greater demand for the need of food support for many families struggling, but on the other hand, many nonprofits have actually struggled to be able to do their services under in a pandemic there. So the city has played a big coordinating role to really help facilitate and make sure that those important services not only can continue but can also expand. And just a piece of good news recently, the city in partnership with St. Barnabas received a $75,000 grant to be able to help promote their food hamper program for many months to come. And this was an important program that had actually been suspended because of the pandemic. So just that's one small example of kind of some of the work we're doing with some of kind of the vulnerable and at risk in the city. I think to your broader question, though, cities as a whole or even transit agencies, the biggest impact that we're facing is a lot of our traditional revenue sources that we use and rely upon to run our cities or run our transit systems. Unfortunately, a lot of those revenue sources have started to go down, and that is particularly acute with the public transit system. Our public transit system largely is funded by transit fares and the gas tax, and both of those funding sources have really almost evaporated overnight. That has put our public transit system in a really difficult spot.
So what does this mean? I mean, you've been working with organizations, and we know how important the New Westminster Food Bank is. We know how important St. Barnabas is. You've been working with these organizations to make sure that services are coming together. Are you finding that you're getting support? Certainly at the federal level, we're pressing for more supports to go to cities, and definitely support for transit systems. So far, we haven't yet had a positive response. Are you finding with working with other municipalities, working with the province, that there is some support there, so that the city is being supported in the important work it's doing?
Yeah, well, no doubt, I think New Westminster and all the cities in British Columbia have been working really closely with, in particular, the provincial government there to kind of help coordinate some of the difficult challenges that local government's facing. And, even today I was speaking to Minister Selina Robinson, who's really done an amazing job, and, been in regular contact with all 168 mayors across the province. So that's a lot of phone calls and meetings to check up with all of the mayors there. So, I think the province has really worked hard to make sure they're connecting with local governments there. And I think in many respects, there's been a lot of great programs, both provincially and federally, that have been put out to help support people during these difficult times, and those facing financial challenges there. I think with respect to the challenges we face with public transit, I think we started to raise the alarm bells over a month ago that we were facing some really big challenges with our revenue loss there. So far, we have not been able to receive the level of commitments from the provincial and federal government. I'd say recently there's been some really good conversations and some positive signs from the provincial government about how they might play a partnering role to make sure that we can, as we move out of the crisis, there have a public transit system that is still reliable and safe for people. At this point, haven't gotten the same level of commitment or discussions from the federal government.
Yes, and that's something we're going to continue to push, because, as you pointed out in that Finance Committee hearing, this is vitally important. I'm here with Mayor Jonathan Cote. We're talking about New Westminster past as we get through the COVID-19 pandemic, and I see a lot of people logging on. Deepak and Margaret say hello, Janet as well. We have Denise, who asked the question, has there been any word on supports for transit? And I just wanted to put that question to you, Jonathan. Have you had any word about potential support so that our transit system doesn't decline?
Yeah, so unfortunately, we've already had to make some service reductions on our transit system, and those reductions are expected to continue for the next few weeks to March 18th. There, we are really hopeful that we can actually start to put a pause on that and actually start to help rebuild the transit system and the service there. So far, we have not received any firm commitments from the provincial governments, provincial and federal governments, which will be necessary for us to be able to do that. But I can say that there has been some really promising discussions with the provincial government, because I think the province has really started to identify that as we start to move into the recovery phase and we want the economy to start going again, having a public transit system that's not viable is actually going to hinder those efforts. So I'm cautiously optimistic, and we're having conversations almost on a daily basis regarding this topic and this work, and I'm hopeful. But having said that, time is of the essence, because I think if even by next week, if we don't have firm commitments in hand, unfortunately, the cuts planned for May 18th will have to go ahead.
Yeah, and Jonathan, I think we both shout out to Judy Darcy, our MLA in New Westminster, who's been working extraordinarily hard through this entire pandemic. And British Columbia and the BC government actually has the best track record in the country. You think back a month and a half ago, BC tragically had over 80% of the COVID-19 cases in Canada, but as the other provinces have not put into place the management plans that they should have around COVID-19, BC has fallen from having 80% of the cases to less than 5% of the cases. That's very promising that our BC provincial government has understood the importance of putting in place the health planning, healthcare planning, so that COVID-19 has not taken off as it has in Alberta and Ontario and Quebec, tragically. I've got another question from Brad, who's just come on. Hi, Brad. How can we best lobby the federal government to provide support for essential transit in our community? I'll flip that to you, Jonathan, to start, and then I'll come back on that as well.
Yeah, well, I would love to hear your take on that, Peter, as well too. But I think really this is a critical juncture for our public transit system. I don't think public transit systems have faced this kind of crisis, ever in their existence there. And we are really struggling there. And it's not just a Metro Vancouver issue. It is cities all across the country, cities all around the world. What we've seen in other places, even just south of the border in the United States, is significant federal programs to help support public transit agencies so that they can remain viable there. And I think it's important that that message start to come to the federal government as well too. We fully recognize they've been inundated with a huge crisis and have had to respond with a number of really important programs, but public transit doesn't seem to have kind of raised or gotten the attention. And really, ultimately, I think it's going to be up to society in general to fight and call for support for public transit system there. So maybe Peter, you can best answer what's the best way for an average resident and transit user to get their message to Ottawa.
I think it's certainly writing to me as the member of parliament. I will make sure that is passed on. I had a conversation yesterday with the finance minister, Bill Morneau, stressing the importance of funding both cities, but also public transit. I can see from our feed, we've got Marla and Judy. Judy says, fight for transit, Mayor Cote, and Mayor Cote is absolutely doing that in the most effective way possible. So people writing to me, I can pass that on. We've got a very eloquent mayor who has been a strong advocate. He was invited by the Finance Committee as the singular voice on public transit. But the reality is what we're facing in the Lower Mainland is also repeated in Toronto and Edmonton and Calgary, Winnipeg, Montreal, Ottawa. All of those transit systems are in a similar boat. And so working with all of those other areas to put pressure on the federal government would be extremely important. This is how we get things done, is by putting the pressure on. And certainly when it comes to all of the responses of the federal government so far, for the emergency response benefit, initially it wasn't actually even put into place. And we had to raise a ruckus, and eventually it was put into place. Then we fought hard. The NDP caucus, give full credit to Jagmeet and myself as House Leader, helped to negotiate the agreement that expanded the emergency response benefit to another 3 million Canadians. And then we fought to have the students have a benefit as well. I should flag as well with people in NewWestminster that what we have also negotiated with Parliament last Wednesday, and it was passed unanimously, is direction to the federal government to bring in, without delay, benefits for seniors and people with disabilities. So the federal government now, the clock is ticking, and they have that obligation to bring in those supports for seniors and people with disabilities. And so that is part of what we do to put pressure on the federal government. It's the same when it comes to public transit and for cities. We just have to keep the pressure on. Now, Jonathan, I'd like to ask you how you're living through this pandemic as mayor. Could you run us through a day in your life during this COVID-19 pandemic? What is it like to be the mayor of a city of NewWestminster during this time? What are the kinds of challenges you're confronting on a daily basis?
Yeah, well, I think like everyone, my life has kind of been turned a little bit upside down, and how we go about our daily activities is all done a little bit differently. In response to the pandemic, the city worked as hard to get as many people working for the city to be able to work from home or to spread out to different locations in the city to allow social distancing, so the city could still do the work that it needs to do. Generally speaking, I'm finding that I'm working most days at home. I'm probably going into City Hall one or two days a week. but doing a lot of meetings on Zoom, just like we are here tonight, and connecting with a variety of folks there. Now, working at home, as I think a lot of young families is discovering, has its own challenges with it too. We have three daughters in school, so we're trying to coordinate their online learning. My wife is working from home as well too, so it's definitely a busy household where we're giving up meetings, trying to organize and stay coordinated. So, I think there's been times where it's been lovely to all be together as a family, but there's been times where it's been a bit of a juggling act, and have to keep all of the balls in the air. But I think it's an interesting time. Really stressful work both at the city and in TransLink, and we're used to dealing with these difficult issues, meeting face to face and working with people, and now we're looking into our computer screens and looking at various little boxes in Zoom meetings. But I think people are adjusting, and we're still able to do the work that we're doing, but it's definitely a different world out there.
Absolutely, and I should talk a bit about my day, because a lot of the negotiating that we've done to expand the emergency response benefit, to push for the wage subsidy and the commercial rent relief, those negotiation sessions start Ottawa time. So I'm up at 4 in the morning BC time, and by 5 a.m. I'm on the phone back east, talking to folks 5,000 kilometers away. The other House leaders are in Eastern Canada, and so a lot of the folks that I'm speaking with are in Ottawa, and so that's in the same way that you're kind of juggling the work of the city at the same time as your family responsibilities. We're doing the same thing at our house. My parents, as you know, are in their 90s, and so we're making sure that they have everything taken care of, and that they're not lacking for anything, but also keeping that social distancing that is so important. So we're facing these challenges in the way folks in New Westminster do, which is we just move forward. And
so one question I had, Peter, I know new City Council, we've all moved to electronic meetings, and the public is able to watch our meetings online like they normally are, but we're not all sitting around the council chambers. I'm wondering, how does the House of Commons work under these circumstances, and how does the business of Ottawa move ahead?
Well, I'm pleased to say that as the New Westminster Burnaby MP, I pushed for virtual hearings. We had the first virtual question period last Tuesday, and the second one was this morning. And that's actually New Westminster inspired, because of what I saw with City Council, I thought was inspiring to do at the parliamentary level. So we had all 338 members of Parliament online, and we were able to ask questions to ministers and bring the stories from right across the country. I can't travel. If I travel out of New Westminster at Ottawa, it's very clear from medical officials that I would be a vector for the virus. And so rather than traveling across the country, I have to do my work from New Westminster. But now, because we have a virtual parliament set up, and the next question period is every Tuesday and Thursday until the parliament is no longer suspended. People can watch on CPAC, or they can turn on the Parliament, the House of Commons website, which is Parlview, Parlvu, and they can watch a virtual question period. So that was New Westminster inspired, and it's new and innovative, and it's actually working pretty well. There's some technical glitches, but the reality is we can hear from people right across the country, which in our democracy, I think people want to do. We've got a bunch of questions that are coming in, and so I wanted to put some questions to you, Jonathan, that we've got coming in from Jen. We've got, given that our public health officer, Dr. Henry, is encouraging more people to go outside family bubbles, what are the plans for playgrounds and future plans for splash parks this summer? It's getting harder to keep our toddlers and kids entertained. Is there any possibility for playgrounds being opened in some way this summer?
Yeah, so I think the city, like many cities in the region, recognize the important role that city parks were going to play during this crisis to provide people a little bit of relief and a way to get outside during this period. We are anticipating to hear more information from the Premier tomorrow about how do we come out and phase out of the restrictions that we have in place. And based on the information that we get there, we are anticipating that we're going to be able to relax some of the restrictions that have been put in place, particularly when it comes to outdoor park facilities. So at this point in time, there's no set dates for a lot of things, but even just a week and a half ago, we reopened the dog parks because we felt that it was safe and okay to do that. And I expect over the coming weeks and months, we're going to start to see a lot of city facilities start to reopen and become open to the public. But we want to make sure we're doing it right and following the guidance from our public health officials. There's also a lot of discussion amongst all of the cities, particularly in Metro Vancouver, to try and be as coordinated as possible, because it can be quite confusing for there to be different rules between the different cities. So there are a lot of conversations between all the cities on how do we actually coordinate our efforts together and start to kind of deal with these restrictions in a coordinated approach.
Terrific. Thank you for that. We have a shout out from Michael and a shout out from Sharon, and a question for me and then a question for you. A question for me from Brad. What is the government of Canada doing for small businesses when they don't qualify for the relief efforts for rent relief, as well as their landlords not wanting to participate with rent relief? For the moment, we're pressing the government. The rent relief program that was put into place doesn't allow all businesses. In fact, it excludes a whole range of businesses from commercial rent relief. Gord Johns, our small business critic for the NDP, and myself proposed something that was simple and would allow all small businesses to qualify. And we're going to continue to push that because the current rent relief scheme just doesn't help enough small businesses. So that's a question to me. The question to you, Jonathan, from Marianne. Thanks, Jonathan, for some of the street closures to allow for more room for pedestrians, like on the McInnes overpass. Are more planned?
Yeah, we actually have a report coming to council on Monday from our engineering department, and a notice of motion from Councillor Patrick Johnson on this issue. This has kind of been one of the interesting things that have come out of the crisis, is cities around the world have kind of recognized, how do we actually make space for pedestrians and cyclists in this time of social distancing, and at the same time seeing that a lot of our road space is being used much less there. So we've already seen a few examples in NewWestminster where we've actually reallocated road space to make more room for pedestrians and cyclists, and we think there might actually be some more opportunities to be able to pursue that. So what I'd say is stay tuned to council next Monday. This is going to be on our agenda.
Thanks very much, Jonathan. Another question for me and then a question for you, or comment from Michael. He says, I can see the mark of the NDP on the minority government, and I don't think he would have done the assault weapon ban if he didn't have to work with the NDP. Thank you, Michael. We've actually made a big difference on pushing on a lot of these issues, and that's why the Parliamentary Budgetary Officer estimates now that more than 3 million Canadians, including students who have disabilities or students with children, have access to benefits that wouldn't have otherwise without the NDP pushing. And so thanks for your comments, and we're not going to give up. We're going to continue to press because our principle is that as we get through this pandemic for COVID-19, no one should be left behind. Absolutely no one. And I'm saying hi again to everybody watching. We've had a number of people tune in the last few minutes. Peter Julian, MP for New Westminster Burnaby, with our special guest on this Facebook town hall, Mayor Jonathan Cote, Mayor of the City of New Westminster, and also a national spokesperson on transit issues. I was impressed with him intervening at the Finance Committee a week and a half ago as the national spokesperson on transit, and along with one other city mayor, Mike Hurley from Burnaby, they spoke to the issue of making sure cities are not left behind by the COVID-19 pandemic. We've got another question coming in, Jonathan, from Kathy. She says the Q to Q needs to come back. We need to support this as well. What's up with the Q to Q? Is the question.
Yeah, so the Q2Q was one of the items that that was shut down because of COVID-19. It was having some difficulty with social distancing, so there's definitely that that angle as well too. So right now there isn't any immediate plans to reopen the Q2Q, and I think it's something we're going to have to work on into the future. There, I am confident we will be able to restart the Q2Q. But one other thing is, I think important to recognize is the city is also facing some significant financial challenges because of the crisis. We're estimating the city is going to lose about $11 million in revenue. So there will be a few of our regular services that might have to be cut back for this year. And we're certainly hoping to get all of our services back up and running the way residents enjoy and can use to the most. But there might be some services like the Q2Q that do have a bit of an impact there. So we are hoping to get it up and running again. It was a really important service in the community, but for now it does remain closed.
Okay, thanks, Jonathan. We've got Deepak, who's stated, please help keep community television in front of government. We're not forgetting that. Absolutely, Deepak. Archer says, thanks, Jonathan, for moving forward with COVID-19 safety in walking and jogging. And we've got a couple of more questions. Louisa asks, what are the, hi, Peter, I was just wondering, what are the updates on help with regards to those with implied status right now? We actually, in terms of people who have implied status, we've seen a number of people who have resident work permits and they have expired because the federal government has not provided for renewal, and that's put a lot of people in hardship. We have pressed the government, and I just wrote to the finance minister. Jenny Kwan, our immigration critic, has written to the immigration minister, and Daniel Blakey, our employment critic, has written to the Minister of Employment. So we're pushing at all buttons for the government to renew these work permits and make sure that people who have implied status are not left behind during this COVID-19 pandemic. We have a question for you, Jonathan, from Leslie. Heard the City of Vancouver is proposing moving recreation classes outside this summer. Is there any plans for Recreation New West to move recreation classes potentially outside for the summer months?
Yeah, so I think it's a really good idea that we want to explore, and I think the bigger thing the city wants to work on is we want to get a good understanding from a public health perspective. How do we get back to running a lot of the valuable programs that we have here in the city? And I think initially moving more things outdoors, seems like a logical first steps for things. Interesting, the city was already talking about before the crisis hit about running some of its regular classes in some of our city parks and moving outside there. So definitely I think it's an interesting idea. And as we start to really think about how do we get our programs up in place, how do we make sure our community facilities are safe and people feel safe going to them and participating in activities, some of those solutions might be about moving some of the programming outside.
Thank you for that. And a follow-up question for Michael. Will NewWestminster allow for expanded patio dining so that restaurants can provide more space for social distancing outside? Just on the theme of continuing outside for the summer, now that we've got the summer weather coming, this weekend, 25 and 26 degrees will be the high. So summer is coming for sure.
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that we're really concerned about, and I think all cities are worried about, is what is the impact COVID-19 is going to have on our restaurant industry. We know it is one of a few industries that is particularly hard hit because of the COVID-19 crisis there. So, I think we are going to have to think, how can we best support restaurants to be able to survive in whatever the new normal ends up being. we've created a working group in the city dedicated to the local economy, and it's really trying to focus on some of the sectors that are most impacted by this. And I think the restaurant industry will be one that I think is going to see some of the biggest impacts in our community. So right now, the city currently has a program for restaurants to be able to apply and extend their restaurant out onto the patios. But I think the real question is, how do we make those processes easier and more accessible, and make it encourage more restaurants to be able to do that there. And I think that's some work that we're going to have to put our minds to, because I think spreading people out and getting, allowing restaurants to come out and maybe even on a temporary basis operate in areas that wouldn't normally be what you would consider a patio for a restaurant, maybe a way to help us get through this.
Yeah, the NDP intervened. The initial wage subsidy that was provided to small businesses, including restaurants, was 10%. We pushed hard and we got it to 75%, though, with the whole range of terms and conditions that make it much more difficult for small businesses to access it. But it's certainly much better than the government's original plan. That wage subsidy works for restaurants to a certain extent, as well as some of the other programs that have been put into place. Jonathan, what's your sense of the impact on the restaurant sector and the small business sector in New Westminster? I'm certainly hearing from a lot of businesses, and we're doing follow-up. But are you worried about the number of businesses that may close permanently?
Yeah, well, the city is actually our economic development team has worked hard to actually reach out personally to as many businesses as possible, and has actually contacted over 1,000 businesses in New Westminster to hear directly from them. And certainly we've heard a whole variety of responses, with some businesses only being affected a little bit, with others being very significantly hit. Definitely, I would say that the restaurants are a big concern. Even those that are continuing to operate takeout and those types of services are still struggling. And I know myself, me and my family are trying to, a few times a week, order takeout. And when I've gone to the restaurants, I've spoken to a few of the owners of local restaurants, and they've been very clear. They're very worried and uncertain about their future. So I think there's a few industries like the restaurants that are going to be particularly hard hit, and I think those are the areas that I think we're going to want to be able to help support as a community, but also really help the community buy local and shop local, because as we come into the recovery phase of this crisis here, really it's going to be up to our local community to say, do we want local shops? Do we want these businesses in our community? Because without our support, we may see ourselves losing a lot of really important and valuable businesses in our community.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Jonathan. And this is a shout out to everybody in New Westminster and in Burnaby as well. Let's support our local businesses. Let's make sure that they have the wherewithal to survive and thrive. And part of that is what supports we can put into place. But part of it is also the incredible influence we have as citizens in New West to decide that we're gonna support small businesses as much as we possibly can. We've got a few more questions coming in, so we'll go back to the questions. I've got a question around extra funding for seniors, and as I mentioned earlier, the NDP brought forward a motion that passed unanimously that compels the government without delay to provide additional supports for seniors. The top up to the CPP would help in higher costs associated with the pandemic. I certainly agree with that. And this is the kind of thing that we're currently pushing the government to do. So our seniors critic, Scott Duval, who's the MP for Hamilton Mountain, has been pushing the seniors minister to put in place the follow-up to what was adopted by Parliament. So Parliament has obliged the government to act quickly on providing additional supports for seniors. We do not know what that will look like yet, but I will certainly keep folks up to date because that's a very, very important issue. Deepak asks, what are we doing for youth? And as far as youth is concerned, we pushed in a previous motion that also passed unanimously, the government to bring in without delay support for students. The student benefit, which was adopted last week, is the result of that. And that provides $2,000 a month for students with disabilities or with children, and $1,250 per month for students who do not have children or do not have a disability. So all of that, again, from hard push. That's the only way things get done, is by pushing hard. And we've, with Jagmeet Singh as our leader, we've been able to do that. We've got a question for you, from Janet, Jonathan. And so Janet asks, so there's a possibility that we might be able to host small public events of 50 people and under in parks this summer. Is that a possibility? Small public events, 50 and under. Is that something that you'd be looking to the province to do? What are your thoughts on that, Jonathan?
Yeah, so I think the city's position through this entire crisis has been to really say, how do we best interpret and follow the directives that are coming from the public health officer and the provincial government. They really are the lead and a guiding force on this there. So I think the signals we've been getting is that large events in the city, and we are heading into our summer season with so many great festivals. The reality is it seems very unlikely that any of those events are going to be able to be held this summer. We're awaiting word to get more clarity about what size of events can be permitted there, and ultimately, I think the city is just going to look to what is the direction from the public health officer, and then try and ensure that that's properly implemented and that the public is aware and properly educated about those words there. But we're really going to lean and look to the public health officer to make those kind of calls.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very good point. And Janet continues by saying the local arts community needs your support. Buy local, support local. I think that's something that we both agree with 100%. I have Julia, who's asked the question. These are good programs that are offering important financial assistance, but how are we going to pay for it after COVID-19 comes out? And this is a very important question. Federally, as many of you are aware, we spend over $26 billion a year in overseas tax havens. That's money that should be used in common to support seniors, support students, support community businesses, support families, to provide for healthcare, all of those things. The luxury of having $26 billion a year in federal tax revenue go to offshore tax havens, I think, is something that if we ever could afford it, we certainly can't afford now. So what we need to do is start to rejig our priorities. And as far as I'm concerned at the federal level, what we will be doing is making sure that we're not wasting money on overseas tax havens or big handouts to the banking sector, but rather investing in people, investing in communities, making sure that cities are being taken care of, transit is being taken care of, that seniors and students and people with families are being supported, that we're not leaving anybody behind. And since we're coming down to the last 6 minutes in this Facebook town hall, MP Peter Julian with our special guest, Mayor Jonathan Cote of the City of New Westminster. I think in the last 5 minutes, it's worthwhile then talking about what the future holds. Once we come out of this pandemic, either through a vaccine or it dies out, as it did with the Spanish flu in 1919, we will come to the end of this, and we want to make sure that we come out of this with nobody left behind. So at the federal level, as I mentioned, it's making sure that we put into place our top priorities. What does post-COVID-19, what does the post-COVID-19 pandemic look like for you, Jonathan, for the City of New Westminster? What is your vision of when we come out of this, what the city looks like and how we work together?
Yeah, well, I think you're right in your comment. We are going to get through this, and I think during this crisis, I've been really inspired. Watching the community come together, which I think has given me, even more hope that we are going to weather through this and come out of this stronger. I think we need to have our eyes wide open though, and recognize there are going to be some challenges. There's going to be folks in our community that are facing financial hardships in a way that didn't exist before this crisis. There's going to be businesses that are going to struggle a lot more, and there's going to be public agencies like our transit agencies that are going to struggle there. And I think more than ever, I think we need to be able to show our support and recognize the importance of all of these things, the importance of taking care of those most vulnerable and facing difficult times in our communities, making sure that we create the right environment that our local economy can rebuild, recover, and be even stronger, and supporting our public agencies and public services, and recognizing, I think this crisis, people realized how important some of their local services are. I think people often take for granted, the water, the sewer, the garbage, the parks they have in their community, but these are important services that we have in our community, and they need support. All the way from emergency services to public transit there. And I'm hoping we are able to kind of see our way through these challenges and ultimately build a community that is gentler, kinder, and able to compassionately work together to get us through this.
You're so right, Jonathan. And our community has always been a community that comes together. I mean, it's a community that shows remarkable resilience, and because of that, I think in a very real sense, we can lead the way for sort of charting that roadmap post COVID-19. The reality is, in our country, we've left a lot of people behind. And as Jagmeet Singh pointed out in Parliament last week, we don't want to go back to a normal where half of the population had to struggle to make ends meet in any given month. Half of Canadian families, and it's the same in Westminster, are $200 away from insolvency on any given month. We've had the highest family debts in the industrialized world. And part of that is because people are paying for their medication, having to borrow money to pay for the high cost of housing, having to borrow money to pay for their education. And so I certainly hope as well that sense of solidarity that we have in New Westminster is something that we can transmit nationally. And start with the understanding and the foundation that we're not leaving people behind, that we need to make sure that we're putting and making our investments in what is most important. What is most important is the quality of life in our cities, our jobs, making sure that we have a very effective healthcare system. And fortunately, in British Columbia, the BC government has made more investments in healthcare than we've seen elsewhere in the country. And making sure that our public services are strong and that people are taken care of, and that no longer will people have to go into debt to buy medication. We can do that through pharmacare, or go into huge debt to go to post-secondary education. Those are all the things that I certainly hear when I talk to people in the community, the people that have approached us. And so that is, I think, inspiring to me, that we can build a better society coming out of COVID-19. Jonathan, we've just got about a minute left. Are there any final words you wanted to share with the people of New Westminster? You've been great. Thanks so much for being accessible tonight and being available and answering a lot of tough questions that people have been asking. Any final words, final comments you want to make?
Yeah, well, I just want to thank you, Peter, for hosting this evening. I think in these difficult times, we're not able to connect with residents the way we normally do, and I think we have to be creative and find new ways. And thank you so much for hosting and allowing both of us to kind of connect with our residents. And I think to New Westminster residents, I just want to say, I've been really proud of the efforts that I've seen locally, and how seriously our community has taken this. And I think this, along with many other communities in our province, is why we're doing so well here in British Columbia. So keep up that good work, and continue to show kindness and love.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, for being here tonight. Thanks for everybody who tuned in. We had hundreds of people, hundreds of views throughout the course of the evening. I wanted to leave, of course, my number for anybody who wants to contact us for any federal issue, 775-5707. Our email, peter.julian.c1 at parl.gc.ca. If we can help in any way, small business, any issues that you have, please give us a call. Thanks so much for being with us, Jonathan, tonight. And to everybody out there, we hope that you stay safe and stay healthy, and we will come through this together. Thank you very much. Have a great evening.